Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Fireside. This is the Fireside Adoptees Constellation and Legislation space. And this is a space where we hear voices from across the adoption constellation. We hear from adoptees. We sometimes hear from adoptive parents or from first parents or birth parents. And we're here to talk with Ray today. Ray is a domestic American adoptee. She was adopted from foster care as a toddler. She's been in limited reunion with her maternal biological family, which has been both a humbling and healing experience, which has given her a renewed passion to support adoptees who are considering reunion. During the past year, Ray has faced several sudden losses, resulting in the need to navigate unexpected terrain in many areas of her life. And she's also found herself confronting the complexities around adoption trauma all over again. Ray firmly believes all adoptees have a right to community and healing, and has been part of the digital adoptee community for a few years. And you may recognize her as Adoptee Reclaimed on Facebook and Instagram. And she also has a webpage, www.adopteereclaimed.com. So welcome, Ray. Thanks so much for being here in Fireside.
Hi, Greg. I'm so excited to be here.
Thank you. I'm thrilled too. I was really excited that you had been agreeable to start the conversation. I've followed you for a long time. I think a lot of people on here have and are excited to have the chance to hear more about your story and to acknowledge the value you've really been adding to the conversation here in terms of really quality content, very thoughtful posts, and just something that's been really edifying for me. And I think a lot of people would say that. So thank you again for agreeing to meet with me. And I
Sure.
wanted to tell everybody, Ray is all the way over in Guam, the other side of the world, and is graciously taking her early Friday morning, because that's what time it is for her, to meet with us here in Fireside. So thanks very much for that, Ray.
Absolutely.
So I wanted to talk about, first of all, your experience, elements of your story, and maybe we start kind of at the beginning about what you know about maybe the circumstances of relinquishment and how you found out you were adopted, et cetera.
Definitely. The circumstances of my relinquishment were building up for years in my birth mother's life. She had faced a variety of setbacks and challenges for quite some time. She had a child already she was trying to maintain custody of, and I came along as a bit of an unexpected surprise, the result of a summer fling. And at the time when she found out she was expecting me, she was expecting to start a family with my father. Together, they were going to start this brand new family and this new adventure. And he changed his mind a little bit late in the pregnancy and kind of just disappeared into the horizon. So she knew from that point forward she wasn't in a position to parent. She was going to have a really uphill battle to maintain custody of me. And to her credit, she endured that for about 18 months in the foster care system, trying to meet the requirements, go to the classes, meet with the social workers, and eventually was forced to sign her termination of parental rights. At which time I was adopted into a Midwestern family that had two biological children of their own. My name was changed when I was almost 3 or 2. I can't quite remember, but my name was changed in that family. And I grew up and I always kind of knew I was adopted. We definitely did not talk about it. That was the type of family we were. We just weren't going to share our thoughts and feelings on it. It was kind of the mum's the word rule. And I had a really, really hard time. I would say there's not a single point in my childhood that I can remember that wasn't colored by what I now know as grief and trauma and adoption loss. But it wasn't named that at the time. And I was left to assume that I was just like a really difficult kid. And why can't I just do what I'm told? And, why can't I act happy? Why can't I just be happy sometimes? Those were things I would hear or feel kind of inferred upon me growing up in that family. Very much the odd one out, the only daughter in that family, the only adoptee in the entire family, and the only personality like mine in that family. I was definitely a different personality from them as well. So I grew up on that kind of difficult terrain. And when I reached college age, I went to a college that I thought my adoptive parents would like in order to get some support for my college education. And I trudged away down a career path and a particular degree that I thought, was the degree they would want me to get. And I got to my senior year. I was engaged to someone because that was what you did at this college. It was a religious college, and there was a strong expectation to get married for the women, especially. And I I was engaged and I was getting a degree and I was out here at this college and none of it felt right. And I eventually called off my engagement and remember sitting there in my dorm room being like, what am I doing on this path? Why am I here? This isn't me. And I've known that it isn't me like the whole time. But I've acted really well and masked my way through this for years. Why would I do that? Why would I do it so hard that I almost got married to someone who I didn't want to marry? And choose this career path that I don't want to do. And I started to suspect it had something to do with being adopted, but I wasn't quite sure. So I was spending a lot of time in my early years out of college trying to get some answers, going to therapists, reading books. And it took almost 6 years before someone told me the term maternal separation trauma. And none of the professionals I went to, none of the friends I confided in really recognized adoption as being this common theme. So once I heard that word, I was like, I'm gonna stick with that word. That's a pretty important phrase that I need to learn more about. And I found all of the books and I found some of the sparse research there is on the impacts of adoption. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is it. This is me. This is what's been going on. So after a few years of that and really getting closer to reuniting with my biological mother, I started my adoptee account on Instagram initially as Adoptee Reclaimed, mostly out of a desire to reclaim my sense of self that really felt faked and forced my whole life. And you've seen a lot of the rest of the story being part of my Instagram community.
I'm glad you addressed that reclaimed part, because that was actually one of the questions I had for you about what you were feeling had been reclaimed, and that explains it really well.
Yeah.
Do you feel like it was kind of like waking up into a consciousness of, wow, I've been living this way, and it just, I mean, we talk about the fog, right? For example, did a lot of reality just come crashing in on you? Like, I can't believe I've been doing this.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, it really was a click and a tumble of this is not me, and I'm pretending and pretending, and it's not happening. I thought if I pretended long enough and hard enough, I would be that person, and it's not the case. I really deserve to know who I am. I should reclaim that, and thus began that journey out of the fog.
Yeah, it's painful too, right? I mean, the realizations are huge. And
Yeah.
for me, it was very disorienting. It sounds like it must have been for you. You were what you consider maybe almost locked into a complete path through your life.
Oh,
And
definitely. Yeah.
suddenly everything is upside down. And why am I doing this? Why have I been asking? And I think you just said that the solution that you suddenly were hearing about was about separation trauma and what that did. And what was it like first learning about that?
I think it was very validating because I'd been told, oh, you've got probably anxiety or depression, or maybe you have repressed trauma from your childhood. Like I'd gotten a couple hints at to what it could be, but nothing was really pinpointing it to adoption at all. And when I finally heard that, it sort of gave me permission to invite adoption into the picture and look at it more critically and say, okay, this has something to do with it, and I should actually start naming adoption as possibly not the cause, but like the common theme with a lot of the struggles I've been having.
Yeah, and it feels like when that realization hits, it's like very explanatory for a lot of things in our lives.
Oh yeah.
They kind of they slide into view. They make sense in a way they never have. They feel like,
Oh yeah.
I don't want to say they're immediately integrated because they're certainly not, but they feel kind of like maybe these things could actually result in me figuring out some things that, like you said, I've always been told I was a certain way, maybe, and or my behavior I thought was explained by something else. Or maybe for me, I thought maybe I'm, as I got older, maybe I'm just difficult in some ways. I wasn't obstinate, but I thought maybe like when I was failing at relationships, when my marriage was falling apart and I was still in the fog, I thought I'm just a bad person. Why do I do this to people? Why do I break relationships? So it was huge. But I found that when I realized what it was, or when I learned and how painful it was to learn, that it was hard to get people to accept that and to listen. Did
Oh
you
yeah.
meet with any opposition from people as you or did you even come forward at all and start telling people about this?
I think in some ways, the dynamic in my adoptive family was such that I knew from the get-go when I started to explore adoption trauma that this was not the place to take it, to not parade it around in front of my adoptive family and say, hey, I'm thinking this might have something to do, because it just wasn't the conversation they wanted to have. And I knew that innately, which was a blessing in a way, because I think I saved myself a lot of the energy I see many other adoptees expend trying to almost convince their adoptive family or their close friends that this is a real thing, right? And you get gaslit a little bit at first, even by the most well-meaning individuals who don't understand it. So I just completely skipped that step. I just didn't tell them a lot of that stuff because I wanted to sort of explore it at my own pace, on my own terms, which was a real gift for sure, because I was able to sort of leisurely explore the impacts and take time to sit with them and see how they felt to me, if that was really what was going on, or if it could be something else that I wanted to examine. And that was kind of the way I decided to approach it. And it was a good approach, I think.
Yeah, what were some of the resources you discovered? Some of the titles, maybe?
Oh, gosh, I mean, lots and lots of books. There's so many books. I have some that I recommend on my Instagram. I'm always reading some, but there's The Child Catchers, ironically, was the first book I got about adoption, which is actually about international adoption. Um, and then there were a couple of other just articles and some other adoptees on the internet I found as well who were discussing being adopted on the internet, which I didn't know was a thing you could do. So I was like, whoa, other people are adopted and they're talking about it. That's so cool. And it was those sort of glimmers of voices that really led me out of my isolation and into my voice.
Yeah, discovering the community is huge. It's like, I can't believe these people have always been out here. Maybe they're all coming up in awareness too a lot. I feel like there's a groundswell of awareness growing, but suddenly to be in community with people who understand the experience, they're trying on new words and concepts and trying to make sense of it. It's just a tremendous experience. At least it was for me. And it sounds like maybe something similar for you.
Definitely. Oh yeah, it was really a gift.
Yeah, and I feel like it continues too. I know some people would talk about an echo chamber. It's really a community of discovery. It's not because we want to be insular and cut off from everything. It's just these are the people who can help us sharpen our understanding and bring better words and language around what the experience is like. And you've done a lot of that with the way you present content. And that was one of the things I noticed early on. So I came into the community in the middle of 2021. I knew nobody. I didn't know anything. And I started finding people online, and I noticed how well laid out all of the content was that you presented. I remember it being almost like PowerPoints,
Yes,
a lot of details, but they were
for sure.
really enlightening, really illuminating, and very thoughtful the way they were really tightly put together. And they also contained statistical information. So they weren't just, this is what I'm randomly feeling about some, which is entirely valid, but they also had that richness of data and statistics and research in there. And it was a really impressive presentation for me. So I kept coming back and reading more and more of it, and then noticing also the way you interact with people who are commenting. So
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that's a big thing too with you. You're very patient with the people who interact with you.
I try. I really do. It's the curse of the internet, of course. I think lately this year I've been trying something a little new with my content. You may have noticed it's a little less of the PowerPoint info, as much as it's more a little bit more emotional, attention grabby. And part of that is just the pressure of being on the internet for so long. You do feel like you don't have as much energy to expand on the PowerPoint details. And I've done a lot of that. So I wanted to try something new. But you get all different kinds of people who will interact with your content. And a lot of times, if you've seen, they're people who have never really encountered adoption in any light significantly. Even if they themselves are adopted, perhaps they've never considered being adopted as a factor in their life because they've been busy living their life, right? And so I am of the opinion that any random stranger who happens to catch a glimpse of my content will approach it with whatever set of feelings and beliefs they hold at that particular moment. But that doesn't confine them to that person. And so when I'm interacting with them, and sometimes they're quite cruel, if they're just blatantly cruel, I'm like, your set of beliefs is so different that you're not ready to encounter this, and I will simply ignore their comment. But many times I try to encourage that curiosity. If there was a willingness to engage, there's at least some curiosity, hopefully. And I try to foster that with those patients and kindness. And oh, you might not know as much as you think you do about this right now. It's actually really complex. I encourage you to learn more. And that works more often than not. And sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes they just want to be mean to be mean. That's okay. We just let them move through their day and delete their comment later.
Yeah.
So,
And when we were talking about the sorts of things we discussed in the interview, you talked about kind of like preserving your energy or conserving it and knowing where
right.
to direct it. And I feel like
Definitely.
that's something you're describing here. It's something you do really well.
Yeah, it's very, very important. I think no matter what you're talking about on the internet or anywhere, it is an extension of yourself and of your energy. And the reality is not everybody who is scrolling through Instagram or TikTok or whatever social media platform you're on that day is in the mood to meet you, right? They just want to project their feelings and their frustration onto you because, you said a word that they didn't agree with. And you have to have that barrier when you're on social media. You have to remember that it's although it's your personal story more often than not, although it is your personal projection of yourself and your own effort and research going into these pieces of content, um, it's not personal when a stranger says, well, I think your birth mom made the right choice giving you up, or well, at least you weren't aborted, or whatever really mean things they want to kind of throw at you. And you just say, okay, well, that's just someone who's not having a good day or hasn't had a kind life, so they don't know how to be kind. And you ignore it. And it's really hard to do as an adoptee because we tend to be people pleasers and very empathetic and very concerned about our external identity as it's presented back to us, because that's how we develop it. Through the loss of identity and adoption, we need that external kind of confirmation of who we are, which is why a lot of adoptees get onto social media and end up in just a really big scandal or a really big painful comment war. You can kind of sometimes come across these, and I try really hard as much as I can to respectfully and considerately withdraw from those, because those are not they're not helping them, they're not helping me. It's not a beneficial conversation. So if you are going to be an adoptee on the internet, or if you interact with adoptees on the internet, try to be mindful of that fact that although it's a presentation of their personhood and of their self, it is limited by the bounds of the medium, which is social media. So
Yeah.
you'll still
Yeah.
get some stuff that you just have to ignore and not take personally and say, well, that's that person.
Do you find that, because the other thing that I observed, and you and I observed in other content creators, is the evolution of the adoptee while they're on social media. So I remember seeing one of the videos that you did. It was like half an hour after getting off a conversation with my biological mother. Is she ever going to call me again? Or all the anxiety bubbles that you were describing, all the thoughts and the feelings. And I feel like there's been an evolution in you in terms of a boldness that's coming forth more. I don't know if you see that in yourself.
I do, and it's both good and bad. It's good in the sense that a lot of that boldness is coming from a long-term reunion with my biological mother. I see myself in her, and I feel more confident in who I am, and therefore I'm more confident in my voice even on the internet. You can see that. And some of that also, unfortunately, is from being on the internet for almost half a decade. The algorithms favor boldness and extremism. They really do, even though they've tried to make accommodations over the years. And I have made many really good, really important pieces of content. For example, vital records adoptees should know, right? I put a lot of time into that. I made this beautiful video and turned it into a reel and provided this list of all of the vital records adoptees should be aware of. And it just doesn't go anywhere. It just doesn't get presented. But when I start a video that says, every adoptee should find out at some point at their life that people didn't care about being adopted, that's a shocker. That one's more radical. That one's more bold. It gets more views. And it's hard not to, in your desire to reach more adoptees and your desire to help more people come out of the fog in whatever way they want to come out of the fog, to not go that route. So I'm kind of experimenting with it this year, trying to figure out where my line is in terms of how bold I want to be in my voice. And where I feel like, maybe I need to do a little bit better. Where can I improve some of that shock and awe content and mix it with my traditional and more natural detail and information and PowerPoint style infographic type thing. So it's a journey, it's an exploration.
Yeah, it's definitely a journey, and it's exciting to see too. Meaning, because we're along on this with you. I mean, we saw recently what happened, for example, with a natural disaster in Guam and how that devastated your life in so many ways and the people around you, and our hearts were like feeling a lot of that. Just the recovering from that must have been so difficult, and maybe it puts your life in a whole different perspective when you don't have access to as many things, to basic necessities of life, right? That suddenly have
Right.
that very real for you.
Yeah, yeah. So actually, ironically, yesterday was the 1 year anniversary of Typhoon Mawar, which for those of you who don't know, it was the second strongest typhoon to ever hit the Mariana Islands, and one of the five most strong storms ever recorded in history. Typhoons, I mean, which means it was pretty impressive. It had 180-mile-per-hour gusts of wind. It caused billions and billions of dollars worth of damage here on the island, and we were without power or water or cell service for a couple of weeks actually. And it was very interesting going through that as an adoptee because first of all, it cropped up kind of out of the blue. I think we had less than 72 hours notice that it was going to hit the island because that's how fast it formed and changed direction towards the island. And it's an island, which, mind you, there's nothing around for thousands of miles. I mean, you can't just like drive out of state. You're stuck here, so you have to hunker down. And although the structures here are concrete and whatnot, and you get your dogs in from outside, and you put your cars under the garage and try to hope that things will be okay. You can't really do anything. You just have to let it happen to you. And I remember sitting there in the dark with my husband as the storm was passing over, and the power had just gone out, and the shutters sounded like they were going to rip off, and we felt the air pressure changing around us like you were in a washing machine almost, right? Like it was just like your brain felt like it was in a washing machine because of the air pressure of this typhoon. And I remember thinking, gosh, I'm just so calm for the scale of the situation. Like, I feel like I shouldn't be this calm. It doesn't quite make sense. And in the aftermath, and as we were sloughing through not having power and water and, flushing our toilets manually and all of that kind of thing, soaking up in 90 degrees heat with 90% humidity, I realized, you know what? I'm handling this a lot better than many of the other folks on the island. You'd see them, and they'd say they're like overwhelmed and they don't know what to do and blah. I'm handling so well because I have been wired for trauma. I've been wired for this kind of thing. I've been wired for this catastrophic change, this unexpected loss, this like, okay, guess we don't have power and water now. And I have always been kind of like, okay, roll it into the drumbeat. What do we need next? And so, I had a couple of friends who were like, wow, you're handling this so well. You're being so brave about it. And I didn't feel brave about it. It just felt familiar. It felt like something I was born into. And that was really weird for me to kind of realize that and to see that juxtaposition and how it kind of left me a little isolated from a lot of my peers and my friends on the island who were, rightfully being like, I can't find gas. What am I going to do? The line's 3 hours long. I have to get into my job to make sure that everything's okay, but I don't know. I haven't been able to flush a toilet in 48 hours. And I was just like, oh, okay, yeah, we'll figure it out. And there's a camaraderie and a common humanity that I feel like I was almost missing because I was so collected as a result of being wired for trauma. So that was really different. It was really interesting to go through that and to see how it affected me versus how it seemed to affect others. It was a benefit and an asset in the long run, but it was a bit strange going through it.
But that is really insightful. I would never have known that. Hearing you say that and seeing other people in the chat here commenting about being calm during extreme crises. And situations of unrest, wired for trauma. Yeah, unfortunately so, but in this case, it served you in a way, right? We're not trying to say this is the benefit of being an adoptee. I love this.
No, it's just a
But
weird side effect. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. It's interesting. Like it's almost like a, a trauma response that served you when you needed it versus
Yeah.
showed up as just being triggered or activated in ways that it was almost like a reverse of them, right?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I've given it some thought since then, and actually, now that we're talking about it, maybe I'll make some content on it. But I think it's one of the weird things, everyone's like, oh, aren't you grateful for being adopted? And obviously the blanket grateful, no, that's not the way to go about it. But in some ways, skills that I have because of being adopted have been beneficial. In the same way that being born extremely short or extremely tall does occasionally have its benefits. But that's not the point, right? It's not like, oh, well, then we should all just like green mark all adoption all the time because you can have benefits from it.
Yeah.
No, that's not the point. It is still something we should be trying to avoid if possible, in my opinion. But it is something that when you have a chance to come out of the fog, when you have a chance to get your grief acknowledged, when you have community and healing and connection, and a chance to reevaluate your biological heritage, I think all of these are factors in what gives me the ability to say this next sentence. You can find traits of being adopted that help you thrive. And that's I think a good goal to work towards for anyone who has experienced adoption. I think it's good to find those traits and let you thrive.
Yeah. And unfortunately, many of them revolve around, seems around this word I don't like so much, resilience.
Yeah. Yeah.
And hypervigilance sometimes you, unfortunately, it drives
Yeah.
you
True. Those are
full of,
some of the initial ones. But also, I think, for example, like adoptees are the only people I know who, as adults, have the opportunity to not just critically examine their childhood, which a lot of people do, but also to really examine how it formed their sense of self and recreate that if they choose. The vast majority of people that I meet never receive the opportunity to do that because it's not an imperative. They're surrounded by people who they're biologically tied to. So they've always been someone who likes chocolate ice cream because their dad likes chocolate ice cream, or who's done this particular job because their mom did this particular job. And they never think twice about it. And they just kind of plod on along all the way through. And yeah, that works, I think, for a lot of people. But for adoptees, what a gift to be able to be an adult, to look at that and say, hang on, is this who I am really? Is this who I want to be? Is this the trait that I have, or am I just performing that trait because I'm expected to? Right. And we just get to really explore that in a way that non-adoptee people don't seem to do very much.
yeah, the awareness and the part of identity formation is much more apparent, I think, to many of us
Definitely.
versus what's everybody goes along with, because like you said, you're immersed in your biology, you're surrounded by it, you're full of
Right. Yeah.
traits.
It's very much your climate. So you don't realize that it is even a factor. And adoptees get to realize that.
So one of the things that leads people to search is this desire to find traits. What was searching like for you? When did you decide to do that?
Searching was unexpected. I have a really supportive partner, and I bounced the idea off of him a few times. I was out of college for a few years, and I knew that I was a domestic adoptee. So I knew there was a chance that I could find my birth mother if I wanted to. Now, mind you, I'd never gotten her name. I'd never gotten any information about her from my adoptive parents. But when I made a social media account at, I think, 18, a couple of weeks after I started that, a stranger DM'd me with pictures of me as a baby and just gushing about how apparently this individual was my foster mom for a very brief period of time before I moved to the family that I was adopted into. And she let my birth mother's name slip. She knew my birth mother's name and she told it to me. And I looked up the social media profiles I could find under that name, and there was someone who did bear a striking resemblance to me. But I was 18 years old, and this was a stranger messaging me, and I had no idea that I was in a foster home or that that foster home was trying to adopt me and all of this other information she was kind of flooding me with. So I buried it away and I went to college and I lived my life. And then I broke up that engagement and came out of the fog and met my husband and things were going. But I'd always had this in the back of my mind that I have my birth mother's name and I could probably find her if I wanted to. So I bounced off him a few times. He was skeptical but supportive. He was like, up to you. I mean, you should really do what you want to do. Right. I'm looking to him for approval, even though it's not his life that's on the line. His story is not the issue here. But I was trying to get that because as an adoptee, I wasn't confident enough that it would be okay for me to go look. So I almost needed that permission. And when I got it, I did a public record search for my birth mother's name using just her name and approximately her age. I was told the age she was when I was born, and I didn't know if that was accurate information or not, but I decided to just do the math and figure out what year she would have been born. And I put that into the public record search along with her name. Oh, and I knew from the foster person who had messaged me that I also had a brother. I didn't know I had a brother, a half brother at the time. So I knew these three pieces of information: her name, her birth year, maybe, and that there was a boy who was older than me that was a half brother. And sure enough, in the public records, I paid like the $2 fee to get the public record subscription for like a month or whatever. There was a lady with her name, her birth year, and a boy attached to her name, a man who was the appropriate age to have been my half brother. But there were several addresses listed, and I got a little overwhelmed and I put it away and I waited a few weeks. And then I went back to it before my subscription ended. And I guess I didn't want to pay the full fee. And I took one of the addresses, the most recent one, which shockingly enough was quite literally just down the street from where I was living at that time, like literally within a few miles of where I lived. And I wrote a letter. It was one of those letters that you think about, from childhood. I think, like, if I ever reach out to my birth mom, what would I say? And I said, dear, her name, this is my name, this is the date that I was born, and I think you're my mom. And if you're interested in connecting, if you're open to it, I'm open to it. I'm happy, healthy, and safe, right? I tell her those things because I figure those are the things she wants to hear. I'm happy, healthy, and safe, and here's an email address if you would like to reach out. And I send it into the void. I mean, literally to an address I found in public records. I don't even know if it's hers. It's like several years old. And she's a very transient person. She didn't have a really stable home for a long time. So it's really just a guess, a shot in the dark. And I don't hear anything back. And I forget about it. And the whole summer goes by and I'm kind of ignoring it and forgotten all about it. And my husband and I are worried about a big move we have coming up. So I'm thinking about that. And then I'm checking my email for like an eBay order. And there's an email at the very top from a man's name that says, this is your mother. It's like, what kind of scam phishing account is this? Like, wow, this is getting wild. They're really getting creative. And I click on it. My half brother had penned the email and sent it from his account on my birth mother's behalf because she was so bewildered and overwhelmed by my letter, so excited that she'd gotten it, was the words that they used. She hadn't been living at the address. It was truly a bit of a miracle. She wasn't living at the address when the letter arrived, but the individual who was there knew her, recognized this handwritten envelope might be something important, and took their time out of their day to get it to her. Which was just a true, I don't even know who that is, but when I found that out, what an act of kindness to make sure that this letter got delivered several months after she had left the residence. And so she got that and she sent me this email. And I sent her an email back. I don't remember what I said. I said, oh, wow, so nice to meet you. Here's another picture of me. I would love to get to know more about you if you're comfortable. And I had in my head this vision of a nice slow reunion, which would slow, because I'd read about reunion and I coach on reunion, so I knew that I didn't want to rush it, right? I didn't want to get the emotions away from me, so I was going to go slow. But after a handful of emails back and forth, I gave her my phone number after I felt comfortable with that, and we arranged a phone call, which was going to be the first of what I thought were going to be many, many phone calls. And then maybe someday we could meet, right? So I go to my car with my phone on the day that we're going to have this first phone call. And I'm sitting there in some side street in my neighborhood in my car to get some privacy. And I call her and it rings 3 times. And she answers the phone. hear the line pick up, and at the very exact same moment, we both say hello in the exact same tone of voice. And I don't know how to explain that to you, but it sent a genuine shock, like a primal shock through my nervous system. My whole body just like jolted. And all like alarm bells in my head, that's my mother's voice. That's my mom's voice. That's my mom. That's my mom's voice. I don't even know how to explain it. Like a whole body just had a primal reaction to this is my mother. And needless to say, the nice long phone call plan got thrown out the window, and we went and met each other in person at a dog park within the week. Just to see each other, just to give each other a hug, just to be like, oh my gosh, like I found you. And we've been in reunion ever since, kind of building out that relationship and sorting through the grief and the loss that we've both been through.
I can tell you that I felt that electric thrill hearing you say that, because I can imagine, I mean, as somebody, when I first spoke to my birth mother, obviously the contrast in our voices was between a man and a woman speaking, but to hear somebody who spoke at the same instant as you, in the same voice as you, wow, I can imagine that was
It was a shock.
so powerful. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you know, the complexities around reunion, the up and downness in reunion, and the in and out parts of reunion. And you said you'd been coached on it, or you'd learned things about it. Did you find, like I think so many of us do, that it was completely different than what you were prepared for?
I had read about it, and I also had walked with some other adoptees who had gone through it as a part of the coaching work I was doing at the time. And I knew just enough to know that no reunion follows a particular playbook. They all kind of go their own way, depending on the ways that trauma has affected you both, depending on where life finds you when you find each other. But it did have some ups and downs, and I think really the most fortunate thing that could have ever happened was that my birth mother had gotten some therapy before I ever found her. Of her own fruition, she had gotten some therapy to start unpacking some of this. And it was certainly not enough, right? It wasn't enough for me either. It certainly didn't prepare us completely for reunion, but we had both had enough time to recognize trauma's role in our life and our role in relation to that trauma, so that we could be a little bit trauma informed as we entered reunion. And I think that's really what made it successful, is that we've been able to ride the ups and downs and get to know each other in the awkward, stilted pace that a reunion can take, with so much grace and patience for the process, knowing that like this is a really weird situation, and it's a relationship that has no rule, and we just kind of have to walk through it as it happens. And we've managed to do that to this day.
Did you find that your relationship with your adoptive family changed when you went into reunion?
I, again, didn't tell my adoptive family that I went into reunion. The precedents had been set in my childhood that adoption was not a factor that we were going to discuss or have a conversation about. And so I instinctually protected myself and decided not to tell them for years. I actually only just recently told my adoptive mother that I was in reunion with my birth mother. And I mentioned it offhandedly. I mentioned it as a side point. It was related to a medical thing I was trying to sort out. I said, I found out my birth mom also had this medical thing, so that was insightful for me. And we kind of just moved past that a little bit. And I've been gauging her response to that. She handled it better than I thought she would. It took a few weeks for her to even use the word birth mom in a sentence in the context of a conversation where that was a necessary conversation to have. And we still haven't had a direct conversation about it, actually. But the indirectness was a gift for her, I think, in her emotional vocabulary. And it's allowed us to preserve our relationship as like normal almost, and slowly integrate the fact that I'm in reunion into her consciousness as well. So that's how I did it. I'm not saying that works for everyone, but that worked well for me.
It's funny, as you mentioned it, and you did say that they didn't know, or that people in your adoptive family didn't know. I almost felt like an obligation to ask, what did your parents do? And I feel like it's a very adoptee question, even though we don't want to be asked that. What do your parents think of the fact that you looked for your family? But I find myself wanting to know other adoptees' families did. And it's not because I'm trying to shame anybody. It's just be like, I know what that felt like for me, and I know what my birth mother said. I want you to tell them. I was like, I was terrified, and I ended up having to tell them.
Yeah, actually, my birth mother was the one who wanted to know about my adoptive family a lot. And that's actually been where more of the discomfort has been for me,
Mm.
um, in trying to figure out how to explain the decision I've made to kind of keep those relationships separate, right? One of the first things she said to me, uh, like on our third or fourth meeting in person, was that she wanted to meet my adoptive mom and says, tell her thank you. And there's so many reasons why I was uncomfortable with that and knew that that probably wasn't a good idea. Um, Thankfully, my birth mother and I have ADHD, and we were able to change the subject and kind of drop that, so it didn't become a hard press point. At the time, I think at the very beginning of reunion, there's instinct from both the birth mother and the adoptee to include the adoptive family. And it may be a good instinct to follow up depending on your adoptive family dynamic. But for me, in my situation, it really would not have been. And I was lucky that we were kind of able to brush it under the rug a little bit and sort of delay it so that I could slowly give my birth mother more information about adoption trauma and the environment that I was in and how adoption affected me in that family and how it also affected that family, both positive and negative. And she was able to see, I think, of her own timing and her own realization that, oh, trying to meet this woman who raised my daughter isn't a good idea right now. Uh, and that was how we kind of played that card, and it worked out okay.
Yeah, that's really interesting to hear how that went. And of course, like you said, it's unique for everybody, and
Definitely,
there's no
definitely. There are
recipe
many
for it.
adoptees for whom that support from your adoptive family would be beneficial and useful. More often than not, it does cause some muddling. I think even after casually mentioning it to my adoptive mother and having maintaining a pretty good relationship with her that had no change. I had been in reunion with my birth mother for like 2 years, a separate relationship from the relationship I had as an adult with my adoptive mother, because I'm living my own life, right? I'm living out of the state from her, out of the country from her, right? Um, so I was able to maintain those relationships completely separate. And even after just casually side mentioning it, there was a stiffness to her voice. There was a discomfort in her interaction with me for a few phone calls after that. And she moved past it and we kind of oiled it out over time. But I can imagine if I had been living with her at the time, or if I had tried to drag her into that earlier in the reunion, anything like that, I think it would have created this dynamic where I would have been so worried about my adoptive mother's reaction to me knowing my birth mother. And I would have been too uncomfortable to really fully embrace the new relationship with my birth mother while trying to maintain the relationship with my adoptive mother. I mean, again, I had been in a relationship with my birth mother for almost 3 years before I hinted at it with my adoptive mother. And I'm not saying that's for everyone. I'm just saying it was such a benefit for me to have built that relationship separate from the other one. So when they start to intertwine, there's foundation for both. And I really, really benefited from that.
It's a very, very informative experience and perspective. Thank you for
Yeah,
that.
of course.
I wonder if we could spend the final few minutes talking a little bit about advocacy and the individuals finding their voice. Not everybody will have a social media platform, but
Yeah.
what do you think about people individually finding their adoptee voices?
Yeah. I think it is the most important thing you will do for yourself is to find your adoptee voice. I'm not saying every adoptee needs to be at the forefront of social justice concerns or policy reform. If you feel called in that direction, if that is where your energy and your experience of adoption leads you to, please consider it. But do not, there's a lot of pressure, especially when you first, especially a few years ago on the adopted community, because those were really the only people who were there, were people who were doing this really intense advocacy work, really important advocacy work. There was a lot of pressure to jump on the train and to, not virtue signal, but to get on board with some of this work and to really align with it. And I think that that is so important. If you have the opportunity, you have the position to do that, please do not look the other way if that's something you're called to. But as a baby adoptee on the internet, try not to get entangled with it too quickly. out of pressure to conform. I did a little bit of that, but I knew pretty quickly, I was like, this is serious and important stuff. Like understanding the way international adoption and culture loss and language loss and racial isolation affects someone is not where my expertise is right now. I need to be a learner. I need to listen and learn. And I need to just kind of take a step back and be more of an observer for right now. Take the time to be a baby adoptee on the internet and simply practice reposting. You can repost what other people post, and if it aligns with you, right, sort of start finding your voice. Share what parts of your story are ambiguous enough that, you know, it couldn't hurt you if it got leaked or if someone tried to weaponize it against you, right? Remain ambiguous, remain curious, and take the time to settle into advocacy and let advocacy find you when you're ready. I think a lot of the hurt I see from adoptees on the internet is adoptees who jumped into advocacy with the best of intentions, too fast, too hard, and they're up the creek without a paddle, you know, and they're not ready for some of these really difficult conversations and some of these really biased and meaningful and hurtful accusations. So don't jump into advocacy work right off the bat. That's my rule. And you'll find my account is, I'm very specific about the type of advocacy I do. I always try to support those who need a little boost, but I am not the expert, nor can I position myself to be the expert on the ways that certain types of adoption impact others. I'm not the expert on what it's like to be a donor conceived person, for example, right? I'm not going to talk to that. I always have people trying to get me to talk to it. You will have people in your comments who are like, well, what about this? What about that? What about foster this? What about an orphanage is that? What about international policy this? Know your limitations when you're on the internet and know what you can and cannot speak to as a knowledgeable expert, and have backups as in accounts of individuals who are doing a really awesome job advocating so that you can hand that out. And I do that all the time. I get DMs all the time from would-be foster parents, from international or interracial adoptees. And as often as I can, I say, I'm so glad you found me. Welcome. I'd love to have you here. Also, this might be an account that talks more to the subject you're interested in, to the topic that you need more information about. And in that regard, having a network of knowledge that you can kind of share when individuals reach out to you will really, really be a benefit as you advocate on the internet.
Very wise words. I think it's natural for people to want to wonder, well, do I have anything to contribute? Do I have anything important to say? And it's not always about that, because we do have the importance of our individual stories always. And those can be hard enough to tell, just to have the voice to speak those. But I really appreciate that perspective here. That's it's not something you just plunge in deeply into. You're gonna get weary from the battle, right? Even when you're seasoned, you're gonna get weary from the battle. So that was really helpful, I think. And I hope that everybody who's had a chance to look at your content, which again, as I said, I find particularly really high quality and well polished and just very thoughtful, that they'll be experiencing the same sorts of things I am, which is there's a desire to click through these and learn things. And as you said, you're going to a different format now that's even informing in a different way, working from a different angle, but still the urgency of the message is not do or die message, but it's this kind of underlying, this is what I'm about. These are the things I'm learning. These are the things I would want people to know that I think might be helpful to them. And you have to sift through an enormous amount of material to distill that down, I'm sure.
Definitely. I also wanted to, on your point, you had mentioned, you know, it's sometimes hard to know, does my voice count? Does it matter? What do I have to say? And that's hard on the internet, especially because as a seasoned adoptee digital creator, I guess I could say, you get into a bit of an echo chamber and you're surrounded by adoptees who are all seeming to say much the same thing. And you'll also start to experience sort of the mirroring effect of messaging, where you'll talk about one day, for example, how to forgive your birth mother. And then all of a sudden, within the next week, 3 other adoptee accounts are talking about the same thing. And I think as adoptees, we sometimes see that, we feel like, gosh, I guess I'm not that important, or I guess people are just going to copy me. And, you know, like my voice doesn't matter. I'm just one of the myriads who wants to talk about this. I'm not putting real labor into this. You know, is it really valuable? And I would say I struggle with that sometimes in my work, especially when I see the exact same specific topic being shared or discussed by another adoptee. And I've done it, I'm sure, to other adoptees. They share a topic and I say, oh, I've experienced that too. And I share it from my perspective, right? When you are working through that as an adoptee on the internet, again, as much as you can, try to forgive yourself for realizing that the isolating experience you had as an adoptee is not as isolating as it might have initially seemed to be. I think reminding yourself when someone says they also experienced trauma or abuse like this, or they experienced this type of loss, it doesn't diminish mine. It doesn't make mine less important or fake or anything like that. It simply means that more than one person can experience this depth. And what a gift that is to have that community, and try to see it as an opportunity to connect and not a reminder to diminish yourself, and try to continue sharing your story in your own words as much as you can.
That was really good. That's something that's dear to me, is letting people know the importance of what they have gone through, what they've experienced, and their perspectives. And it is easy to, in fact, we had it as a topic in Fireside. What happens when you feel like I'm not important enough to speak about something, or I compare myself to somebody that I admire in a way and go, I can't do what they did. Why do I think I can say so? That was just really encouraging the way you laid that out. So thank you for that.
My pleasure, Greg.
And I want to thank you for a really wonderful conversation here. Again, coming from all the way around the world on a Friday morning, while we're here on a Thursday night.
Yeah.
Unique experience for us. We do have international people that are probably going, what are you talking about, Greg? It's Friday for me too. So, but thanks so much for making the time to come to talk to us in a particularly clear and cogent way, and to deliver all these things that have been just wonderful to hear. So we really appreciate it. And we can find you on multiple platforms. Would you like to tell people how to find you?
Yes, please do look me up on Instagram at adoptee_reclaimed. Instagram is my main platform. I'm also on Facebook under that same handle, but it doesn't always cross post there. So if you're a Facebook person, you'll get stuff there as well. But definitely, if you're an Instagram person, come follow me and join the conversation. Jump in the comments, respond to my stories. And if you are an adoptee, send me a DM on Instagram and you will get added to my adoptees only stories, which is more personal information about my specific experience of adoption.
We've got people following you right now in the comments. They're saying, I just joined, I just connected with you. So, great. Thank you. Thanks so much, Ray. What a great experience. What a great conversation. And
thanks for hosting, Greg. Such a good opportunity to share.
Thank you. So for everybody watching right now in the gallery here, this will conclude just the recorded section of the Zoom call. So you'll hear an announcement that the recording is ending. Please stay on if you'd like to have a few minutes with Ray on Q&A. Be doing that. And this again goes up on the Fireside Adoptees YouTube channel, where everybody can watch there. So with that, we'll conclude the recording and hope to see you soon again on Fireside.